Thanks for joining us for the next CyberSide chat. This chat is on ransomware, which is an issue that many companies have been, frankly, forced to address in recent times because of this emerging trend. Let's first start talking about what ransomware is. Ransomware is a malicious program that typically encrypts data, but as we'll talk about now, also can encrypt other parts of the computer, including the master boot record. And it's really a bad actor coming in to try to extort money from a company to get either their data or their systems functioning again. Obviously, it's something we're talking about today because it's occurring pretty frequently, and many companies are having to deal with this. And it's again something that should be addressed as part of your overall cyber strategy. And there's really three trends, I'd say, that are making ransomware easier for malicious actors to use. The first is there's really now mass market ransomware. So these are no longer programs that are sort of custom coded, if you will. They're available in the mass market. One of the other things we're seeing is they're no longer targeted at data. So system backups may not always help you in the sense that we're seeing people try to target the master boot record of computers and things like that. So there can be for lack of a better term, a system attack and or an attack on the data. And so, as with cyber, there are attacks on data. There's also attacks, as I've called them in the past, attacks on the grid. We've seen basically ransomware move in that direction as well, which is they can shut down your systems, they can shut down your data, maybe they can do both, but you have to be aware of both types of attacks with ransomware so that you're prepared and you're able to get your systems back up and running if you need to. The third is ransomware as a service, and this is somewhat related to the mass market issue. This is not only readily available, it's also almost comes as a prepackaged software system. So you don't need a lot of technical skill to necessarily deploy ransomware and set it up as a, unfortunately, malicious business model, but a business model nonetheless. On this slide, I wanted to list some of the common forms of ransomware, and this really comes from information from the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance. And based on their intelligence, they've seen a number of these type of ransomware programs really be used against companies. So as you're setting your defenses, there's a lot of data out there. We'll talk about one site that has a good bit of data about decryptors and other things, but these are many of the types of ransomware you should be on the lookout for. The NCFTA has more information as well, but there's a variety of sources out there that can help you try to deal with some of these. So let's talk about mitigation strategy. Obviously, it's becoming more common, but that said, there are steps to take to help try to, avoid some of these risks. Maybe not completely, but avoid many of them. The first is, and it's a key for really any type of cyber attack, training your employees to watch out for phishing emails and other social engineering, because that can be a foothold for viruses. Generally, it can be a foothold for a cyber attack. It can also be a foothold, obviously, for ransomware as well. Defense in depth is something we talk about a lot, which is you don't want just one line of defense, and so having some redundancy in how you're defending, whether that's segmentation or other things, but again, making sure you have a network strategy and a security strategy that does provide defense in depth is also important. When you're dealing with a ransomware attack that is focused on data, obviously making sure you have backups is important because it gives you some comfort if you know that you're not losing a significant amount of data. For some companies, the loss of any data might be really critical, and so you've got to have other strategies as well, but at least you're not starting from scratch, if you will. Managing your computer settings, and this really goes to defaults around running macros and things like that can contain malicious code. You want to make sure your IT and IS people are up to speed and understand both the threat and also how they can help kind of mitigate these threats, generally speaking. Part of that obviously is also security and policy reviews as well. And that's, I think, just sort of good sort of cyber hygiene, if you will, generally. And so making sure that your policies and procedures generally reflect what should be done with any kind of malicious code, certainly ransomware, is important. And finally, sharing intel. If you see something regarding a new form of ransomware or other things, sharing that with the appropriate partners, whether that's law enforcement or other companies, is important so that we can all learn from the emerging trends and hopefully stop some of this stuff from happening. What's the post-infection strategy? So you've been infected with ransomware. What do you do? The first thing, obviously, is try to determine if there is what the form of ransomware is, and then from there, figure out if there's a decryptor. Some of these forms of ransomware have publicly available decryptors, so you may be able to sort of get out of this without paying the ransom, and that's obviously a good outcome if that can be done. Obviously, you want to also take steps to secure the network. So if you have a ransomware attack, you want to make sure it's just contained to being a ransomware issue, and it doesn't spread beyond either the computer that's infected, in the sense of it infects more computers and shuts them down, or if it's just the first step of a multi-pronged cyber attack, you want to make sure you understand that as well. And so many of these things are very focused on encrypting data, getting paid, and getting out. That's probably the dominant ransomware strategy, but there are times where that's not the case, and you just need to make sure that you understand what the ransomware is doing before, early in the process. And finally, you want to assess whether you can or should pay the ransom. I'd say law enforcement typically is not supportive of doing it. Many companies do. There are legal issues we'll talk about in a subsequent CyberSide chat some are specific to the financial industry, others are generally applicable, but it's not a slam dunk always that you should or can pay the ransom, if you will. And so you've got to put some thought into that. Some companies have policies and procedures around that as well. Not every company needs that, but you do want to think through simply before you pay the ransom, and in no small part because paying the ransom doesn't always end the problem. Sometimes it does, and sometimes they don't decrypt. So you've just got to make sure that you understand the pluses and minuses, risks and benefits, if you will, of paying the ransom and whether you can and should do that. Obviously, as we just said, paying the ransom is something that law enforcement doesn't always encourage. I have had and seen many companies do it, but that's typically where other mitigation strategies have failed. And you just need to make sure, both based on the company values, what business the company's in, and what your policies and procedures are, that it's going to be okay for you to pay the ransom, and or it's not. And so again, I think thinking through this ahead of time, how would you react to ransomware? What would you do? Maybe doing, I won't say a full tabletop, but some form of exercise where you think through this and work through your partnerships and do that, I think is an important thing for companies to do in some form, so they're not having to deal with this right on the front line. And finally, there are a number of other resources that can help you. I mentioned the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance, the FBI, the Secret Service, a variety of other law enforcement agencies at the state and federal level can help. Also, there's a independent project called nomoreransom.org that's on this slide, and they have a lot of very helpful information about ransomware, how to react to it, obviously how not to pay ransom. And so there's a variety of companies and government agencies that are partners with them, and I think they have some good stuff on their website, so I'd encourage you to take a look at that. And that's an overview of ransomware and kind of things you can do to help mitigate it to some degree. And we'll talk through the broader legal issues in the future, but thanks for your time, and we'll be doing another CyberSide chat soon.